Right, so I'm going to explain a few things about the traditions in my relationship with my other half, just to get some of that basic stuff out of the way. And the first point is the principle of tradition 4, in which, certainly in AA, one would say, our group can do what it wants according to its own consciousness and conscience, regardless of what other groups are doing, as long as we don't affect any other groups or AA as a whole. And what this means is, with me and Jonathan, I have my life, domain number 1. He has his life, domain number 2. And then we have our life together, which is, as it were, the AA as a whole. So I can do what I want in my life as long as it doesn't affect the relationship as a whole, the household effectively as a whole, and as long as it doesn't affect him in an unreasonable way. Of course, groups do affect each other. If group 1 is covering the steps and is doing it very, very well, it will attract people away from another group. Groups cannot help but affect each other. So tradition 4 is about not unreasonably affecting someone else, another group. So in my relationship with Jonathan, I must not unreasonably affect his life or affect the household. Now, what this means is his life is none of my business. His character defects are none of my business. Now, the approach that we take in AA is we correct our own faults and we don't correct other people's. We take our own inventory. Because I'm in a relationship with someone that is capable, albeit not formally through the steps, of taking inventory and making course adjustments as he goes along, I have to trust that, which means my only business is myself. This is why I don't need to work on the relationship. I do the work on me. Tradition 10 comes into this as well, along with tradition 4. Whatever in his internal world or his life he wants to convey to me, he is at liberty to and is gratefully received. But if he doesn't want to talk about certain things, that's fine. If he doesn't want to talk about his past or his exes or what is going on at work or his other friends or where he's been or where he's going or what he's doing or what is on his phone or what is on his computer, that's fine. And I'm not to even notice any of those things. I do not have a right, by virtue of being in a relationship with him, to know who he is texting. I don't have any of his passwords. I've never hacked any of his devices or accounts. As someone said to me, either you trust someone or you don't. And I trust him. And that was a decision made a long time ago. What else? Decision making. Any decision which affects the household or what we ourselves do together is made together. So that's really the principle of tradition 2 and also concept 12, discussion, vote and substantial unanimity. Substantial unanimity, when there are only 2 of you, means you have to agree. And the approach we adopt is you, by default, yield to the other person. That's the starting point of the negotiation. Not what do I want, it's what do you want? And when I'm saying what do you want and he's saying what do you want, we end up meeting in the middle. We don't start with what I want or what I think. No, what would you like? And the default position is you do what the other person wants and then they graciously grant a concession back in your direction, which is why we don't argue, because it's more important to be together than to be right or to get what we think we deserve. Occasionally there's a small veto with important matters, but that's rare. The principle in Tradition 7 of being fully self-supporting through our own contributions. Now, households might legitimately operate differently on a financial footing, especially if there are children involved. There are lots of reasons why maybe one person would be earning more than another, a lot more than another, or working externally more. The other person may spend more time on the household. But it's very important for both of us to be fully self-supporting through our own contributions financially, but also emotionally, so that I'm not bringing a defective, deficient person to the relationship, wanting the other person to be a nursemaid or a therapist or anything else. I've got my own systems. So what we do to support each other is not to fill in the gaps, but to share of our own strength, in the same way that a fountain simply pours out water and then it's free for people to come and drink at the fountain. That's the image that we have in our relationship, that I'm not there to fix him, he is not there to fix me, but we share out of our abundance. Because if I'm okay and everything is going well with me, then that, I hate the word energy, but that energy then flows into the relationship. I'll come to work in a bit, because actually I don't want to say too much. I think that there are lots of relationship questions and the work stuff can be covered fairly briefly. So I'll do some of these questions first, if I may. There was one which was, well, they're all interesting, but I think this one is a sort of preliminary one. How do I praise or love the truly evil? And then there's a short list of items which fall in the category of the truly evil, which I won't read out. Now, no one is being asked to praise people who are truly evil, but love is certainly, in my experience, possible. But what one has to do, and I found this immensely helpful in my own life, I don't want to criticise the person who wrote the question, but to stop using the word evil. Because the word has the danger of setting apart the people thus designated as an entirely different category of human being. Not like us. And it's the truly evil. You see, it's separating. And if one looks at evil acts, or acts which cause harm, and there's a whole spectrum of those, from the most trivial, dropping a piece of chewing gum on a carpet, all the way through to great crimes. Evil turns out, in my view, I don't think I'm alone in this, in breaking down into, as it were, the way a molecule breaks down into atoms, that the molecule is not the primitive primary thing, that there are smaller things of which it is made, and I think evil is made of smaller things. If you look at an evil act and you unpack it, what you end up with is ignorance, stupidity, the simple inability to think things through, irrationality, so faultiness in the thinking, or illogicality is the faultiness of the thinking. Irrationality is decision-making based on emotions which skew the outcome. Negligence, selfishness, and there's a seventh, malice, or the gaining of pleasure from other people's suffering. Now, the trouble is with each of these 7 characteristics, which can be discerned behind, in my view, any so-called evil act. So stupidity, ignorance, illogicality, irrationality, selfishness, negligence, and malice. I'm capable of all 7 of those. And if one examines one's conscience, one will find examples of those in one's own past, in one's own behaviour, in one's own mind. So I'm not so very different. And that's what makes it frightening, to realise one could, under different circumstances, either be responsible for certain acts or be responsible for ignoring or overlooking or bypassing certain acts. So I've got to be very careful with self-righteousness when it comes to the ills of the world. One of the great things about AA is that I'm responsible not for the world, but for my very small contribution in my own very small corner of that world. So I'm not to ignore it, but I'm to look at what my contribution is. With love, as I said earlier, to recognise they, like us, have these characteristics. They've formed differently, they've produced different outcomes, but the nature is not different of those underlying characteristics. This is a very good question. Well, they all are, but how to let the partner more into your personal struggles or something struggles, maybe ADD struggles, alcoholic addict struggles, when they don't have the same struggles or experience. I think I'm right in saying, I might be wrong, I know someone will correct me if I am, I think Anna Karenina starts with a statement to the effect that all happy people, all happy families are happy in the same way, and all unhappy families are unhappy in a different way, which makes them interesting, which forms the basis for the novel. I don't want to speak ill of Tolstoy, but I think he's wrong. I think unhappiness is so boring. I mean, how many of you have listened to a Step 5? Okay. Were you as bored as I am? Dull, 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 dull. After 10 minutes, you know 95% of what you need to know. I'm resentful at the cause, I wasn't respected, I wasn't valued. It's so dull. You could swap people, you could go into people's houses in the night and swap over their Step 4s the night before a Step 5, and no one would notice. They're all the same. Happy lives are fascinating because they can't be replicated, which is why one can't copy anyone else in AA who's doing well. You can learn individual bits, but you can't become them, you can't even become like them in any way. People who are happy and functional and operating well are inimitable. And I thought when I was growing up I was terribly interesting because I was terribly unhappy. And that sitting in the corner in the dark with a torchlight reading Sylvia Plath made me a great raconteur. And I was constantly amazed at how dull other people found me. I thought, well, I find myself fascinating. And it's because people are trivial. It's because they are superficial. It's because they aren't sensitive the way I'm sensitive. That's why they're not taking an interest. As Heine said, der kleinste lebendige Philister zerstückert am Neckar, viel glücklicher ist als ich, der tote Held, der Schattenfürst der Unterwelt. That was, I won't try, but if you don't speak German, hard luck. I was there on my, as Heine put it in his own case, my mattress grave, full of self-pity. And I loved all of that. I loved all of that German Romantic poetry when I was growing up because I resonated with it. Thank God I got over that phase. It's left some traces, but not a lot. We're good. Now, the reason I say all that is because the things I'm struggling with, I thought intimacy was sharing my unhappiness with someone else and having them nodding very solemnly at my very long explanations as to why I was unhappy, and that it's the other way round. That stuff needs to be dealt with, but it's not the real stuff. The real stuff is the enjoying things together. So with Jonathan and I, we both have our own issues, but frankly, we deal with 98% of them with our own networks, not with each other, because we want to reserve the relationship with each other for the real stuff. So Jonathan, for instance, has never come to an AA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting even out of curiosity to see what's going on. He's like, if that's helping you, very good, but I don't need to be interested in it. Any more than he would take an interest in my blood test results from the doctors. It's important, needs to be dealt with, but it's not what creates intimacy between the two of us. It's shared experiences which create the intimacy, not what's happening in the bubble of my own mind. Many years ago, he and I went out for dinner with a bunch of people in AA, and he was very polite and very entertaining, and everyone loved him, and we all had a lovely time. And afterwards, I asked him what his experience had been like of these 7 or 8 AAs. And he paused for a long time. And then he said, it was like being alone in an empty field in which wells were sunk, and at the bottom of each well was a single frog gribbeting to itself. Quack, quack, quack. A single frog, each one not actually having a conversation with anyone else, not even aware that there were other wells with frogs stuck down them, but simply issuing extracts from its own monologue, which was clearly playing the whole time, giving the appearance that there was a conversation at the table. There was no conversation at the table. Nothing was happening. Pan, the Greek god of sort of fun and jollity and riotousness and exuberance and so on, the great nature god. There's a very good passage in The Wind and the Willows about the god Pan. But anyway, Jonathan and I went to an AA party many years ago where I asked him afterwards what it was like, and he said Pan had left the room before the party even started. We can be, now we're sober, can be a little bit serious occasionally. Maybe I can be a little bit overly serious. So I don't need to let Jonathan into the struggles. 3 little stories which I think are illustrative of this. Once I had a very... I like to keep my problems simple generally, but a few months ago I had what I thought was a very, very complicated problem. And Jonathan likes to pick me up from work and we walk back home together because I work near where we live. And I was explaining, making sure he had all of the facts and the information because I wouldn't want him to misunderstand the complex problem. And halfway through the explanation, I realised it wasn't landing. And so I said, does that make sense? I thought, pit stop, find out how we're doing. Has he Has he been following? Has he been listening? And I said, does this make sense? And he says, it does to you, and that's the main thing. And this bubble of a problem popped, and it was gone. When I've got a psychological maladjustment to something, I'm seeing a ghost. If you see the ghost too, I'm sunk. Because now the ghost is real. What are we going to do about the ghost? The long, sad face in response to my problem. When he can't see the ghost that I can see, I now know the ghost isn't real. He would be doing me no favours at all to mirror that back to me and say, yes, that must be very hard. He can't see it. Sponsors can do the same thing as well. So to be unable to bring a sponsor out of the good mood they're in is a very, very helpful thing. A couple more stories. Once I came home after a day I'd found physically tiring and taxing, and there was a lot going on, and I came in through the front door into the kitchen. Within a few seconds I issued a complaint about the day and my life and circumstances, and the complaint lasted no more than 10 or 12 seconds and was not directed at him or about him. And he gestured in the general direction of my complaint, and he said, that needs to stop. If you permit it, it will take over. Perfect response. Would also be a perfect response by a sponsor. And a third example, there was a situation with work a few months ago. So this is a good example of, can you bring, do I bring situations? I do actually. Certain practical things I'll talk to him about, and occasionally certain relationships with others we'll talk about. But I started to present a situation, and I thought I'd get 10 or 15 minutes of sympathy before we converted into the next stage. I presented the problem, and rather than getting sympathy, he said, right, what are we going to do about it? So immediately into the solution. This was not going to be about me and my feelings about the problem. If you've got a problem, deal with it.
Of course, the most illegible one's on top.
What's that one? What does that one say? I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah. How you experience grieving feelings with family members.
Okay, I like that. Okay, so over the last year and a bit, my mother died. My best friend died in very bad circumstances. Another close friend died of cancer. 4 or 5 other people in our immediate environment have died. There's been an awful lot of death around us. In fact, another friend of mine died a couple of days ago. Don Pritz, very good AA speaker, talks about how he responded to a question, how do you process feelings? And he said, you're not supposed to process them. That's the problem. You're trying to process them. Feelings are supposed to be felt. That's why they're called feelings. There's nothing to do with them. It's very, very helpful, I found, to recognise what I'm powerless over and what I'm not powerless over. The 3 things I can change are what I believe, what I think, and what I do. How do I change that? I can't change anything else. not directly. I certainly can't change my feelings directly. And the attempt to do so by chemical and other behavioural means, illegitimate behavioural means, are the core of my addiction. I think it was Jung that said something to the effect of mental illness stemming from an attempt to avoid legitimate pain. Very good. The three things I can change are my beliefs, my thinking, and my behaviour. Changing behaviour is very, very straightforward. You find out someone that is functioning well in an area, you say, what do? You pin them down and you copy it, and if it works, you carry on, and if not, you find someone else, try again. With beliefs and thinking, the way to change a belief, I've discovered, is by an act of the will. I don't need to believe in the new belief in order to believe it. I need to make the decision that it is true, live accordingly, and then the truth of it will gradually permeate my being, my mind, my soul. Now this is perhaps a complicated point, so I'm going to elaborate on it. If I'm wrong, what is right will seem wrong to me. So the bit of my mind which is in error is unable to see what is right. If it could see what is right, it wouldn't be thinking the wrong thing. It's broken, which is why it's thinking the wrong thing. So the job is not to convince the wrong bit of my mind of what is right, because it will never believe it. My ego will never be in favour of its own abolition.
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't hear it.
The whole thing? So,
No, the last two sentences.
okay. Which means that what's so interesting about that, my ego, its IQ is about 20 to 30 points above mine, and it stops me from hearing the very thing that I need to hear, which is why it didn't go in. It knows there's dangerous material here, which is why it switched something off. So I can't say the same thing again, because I never can, but I'll keep coming at the same point from different angles. When I'm in my wrong mind, the wrong mind is broken. Its whole perspective, its whole system for looking at the world is broken. It cannot be convinced that right is right. It's already made up its mind. The input into the software has already been made, and the software can only produce the input in accordance with the programming. I can't get to right thinking by starting with the wrong thinking and gradually replacing bits of it. I'll give you a very good example of this. When I was in my first couple of years, I was in a horrible work situation which I hated, and my sponsor dared to say to me, if you trust God, everything will be all right. And I said, it's all very well for you. You've got a big house. I don't have a big house. You've got lots of money. I don't have money. I simply don't believe it. The reason I didn't believe it was because my whole mindset was wrong, which is why I had the problem in the first place. That part of my broken mind could not be mended by explaining to the broken mind why it is broken. The ego will never vote in favour of its own abolition. When you bring in the exterminators to exterminate the cockroaches, you do not give the cockroaches a vote. You do not ask them what they think about this process. You spray them. When I've got an emotional or psychological problem, I don't negotiate with the terrorist. I spray it with God. So to change a belief is to find out what the correct belief is and say, this is true, to state, to declare confidently, this is true, and to live accordingly. There is a phrase in Berlin Alexanderplatz where he talks about the reader being inside human skin. It's a very good line because it means that you are not the skin. The person is not the physical being. So new belief, old belief, I am a physical lump of flesh running around the world trying to make a name for itself, trying to create permanence in an impermanent world. New belief, I'm spirit. I happen to live inside a physical form, or appear to live inside a physical form. I appear to be communicating using my physical form as the communication device. Death is a fairly major change of address, nothing more. That's the new belief. The materialist in me cannot be convinced this is true. It starts to say, but the evidence is... Well, very good. You see, impossible. The materialist cannot be convinced that it is not real and spirit is. It's not interested in that, because if it agrees with the idea that the material is appearance and the spirit is real, it has just agreed it does not exist. The ego cannot agree that it does not exist. It couldn't say, in saying the statement would have to disappear. It's a logical impossibility. So this is why you can't negotiate with the ego. You drop kick the ego out of the stadium. Don't listen to it. Blah, blah, blah. It's a radio on in the background. It cannot be taught or trained or brought to heel or given little treats. Doesn't work. Changing beliefs, changing thinking. And this is a terribly important point, which has got nothing to do with relationships or work, and I don't care. So, complain to Adam. I will mention work very, very briefly at one point. I promise. Changing thinking. I'm not responsible for the thought that knocks on the door. I am responsible for whether I let the thought in, give it a cup of tea and a slice of cake, and ask it how it is. If I discover I've let the wrong thought in, I escort it to the door, and then it knocks again, and I'm so stupid I let it in again, and I take it out, and I let it in, and I take it out. There's a new word that someone must have learnt somewhere, and they started to use it in AA, and now everyone's using it: intrusive thoughts. And it goes something like this: I have intrusive thoughts. And you want to say, pumpkin, we all have intrusive thoughts. That's what thoughts are. They intrude upon you from no one knows where. Maybe the physical brain, who knows? But you're sitting there, you're having a nice day, all day long, thoughts are intruding. Some are nice, some are not. Some are useful. Some say things like, let's have a pretzel, let's go to the bathroom. Those are useful thoughts. Other thoughts, like, I need to push him down the stairs, are not useful thoughts. Recovery is about working out which the useful thoughts are and which the useless thoughts are, and acting on the useful ones and ignoring the useless ones. Nod slowly if this is making any sense whatsoever. So all thoughts are intrusive thoughts. Very good. It's what you do with them when they intrude. I am not responsible, and I do not judge the quality or the state of my recovery, my spiritual status, my personality on the thoughts that intrude themselves into my mind. They're simply produced, it seems, by the physical brain, which is programmed to do whatever I've been telling it to do by practicing for many years. If you spend many years practicing thoughts of future catastrophe, you programmed it to then churn out thoughts of future catastrophe. The physical brain is not thinking. It's producing verbalized thoughts which come at me. My consciousness, my mind, is what I use to work out which I'm going to believe, which I'm going to disbelieve, which I run with, which I ignore, which I make life decisions based on, which I do not make life decisions based on. And learning to change my thinking is about learning to change what I do with my mind in real time. I don't know if you've seen any of those super nanny programs where dysfunctional families bring in so-called super nanny, usually from Essex, to solve their problems for them. And there was this one particular family where there was a child that was screaming and screaming, younger of two boys, screaming and screaming and screaming. And the family said to the nanny, I don't know why he's so traumatized. This suddenly started happening 6 months ago. Why is he so traumatized? And she said, sweetheart, he's not traumatized. You're traumatized. He's in control. And that's my relationship with my own physical brain. I let it run the show for years. Oh, you want to think about nuclear war? Let's think about nuclear war. When are we done? I don't know. I guess when you're done. That's when we're done. And I was like that with everything. And it thought it was in charge because I had allowed it to be in charge minute in, minute out, hour in, hour out, days, weeks, months and years. Whatever it wanted to think about, that's what we'd all think about. And I was full of rage and unhappiness and disappointment and sadness and blah, blah, because those were the emotional flavours of the thoughts I was allowing myself to think. If I want to change my feeling, I have to change my beliefs, my thinking, and my behaviour. That's all necessary to explain the answer to this question about grief. The feelings that I have around other people's death, or death generally, they are what they are. What I get to do is observe the beliefs and the thinking and the my own beliefs, thinking and behaviour. And not to judge the thoughts, but to work out which ones I'm going to take to be true, which ones I'm going to quietly set aside as untrue. And to let the other person in the household do exactly the same. And they say, 2 to 5 years for a major loss. We've had a couple of major losses. What I wasn't prepared for, I was prepared for my own grief process. I was not prepared for the other person's grief process, which meant what I had to do was turn up the power on my own ability to accept without judgment or criticism or condemnation or engagement what the other person is going through. Not to argue, criticize, condemn, or attempt to adjust or change what the other person is believing or thinking or doing. And they're going to believe, think and do some wacky stuff when people die. And the other person will have to put up with the same from me. And eventually, if you hold on to the chair, it passes. How do you give up the demands? How do you see people without wanting your demands to be met? The giving up of demands is the subject matter of an awful lot of the big book. But in particular, the key lies on page 61, where it says, "Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest happiness and satisfaction from this world if only he manages well?" Now I'm going to put that plainly. If I think I would be happy if I got my own way, I'm wrong. And a very good example, if one lives in Western society, as I guess most, but I know not all of us do here in this room today, you'll note that almost everyone has almost everything they want almost all the time, in a way which would baffle people from 100 years ago. The idea, for instance, that one can choose what one does for a living is very new and has certainly not been the case for most of humanity throughout the whole of humanity. And yet there will be people, and I've been one of them, who is in the career they want, in the firm they want, doing essentially the job they want, but at slightly the wrong level and full of rage and pert that things are not the way I wish them to be. There's the story of the princess and the pea, who is lying on 100 mattresses, and there is a pea under one corner of the mattress, and she can still feel it. Western civilization. When I decide to be in a relationship with someone, I've decided that's the person I've picked out of 8 billion people. So you picked someone out of 8 billion people and they're still not good enough. Like, you for real? So the way out of the demands is to realise they're ridiculous. And if reasonable preferences are not consistently met, why did I choose this person in my life? I'm the one that chose them. It's not their problem that I chose them. That's not their fault. That was me. If I say I don't like someone and they're in my life, I'm criticising my own choice. I'm not criticising them. My unhappiness at their behaviour is none of their business. And my favourite story about victimhood is it's from a French novel called The Club of the Incorrigible Optimists, where there is a 17-year-old boy in Paris, I think 1960s, and over the summer, as you know about Paris, everyone leaves Paris in August, comes back at the beginning of September. They come back at the beginning of September, and his best friend, Nicolas, no longer lives in Paris, just gone, no forwarding address, nothing. And the kid goes to see a confidant, who is this old KGB chap who now lives in Paris, works in a camera shop, and he tells the old man his tale of woe about how he was abandoned by his best friend. Abandonment, it's one of those modern words, but occasionally one sees it in older novels as well. And the old man thinks for a while, just like a sponsor will. And he said, "So you were abandoned by your best friend, were you?" And the boy says, "Yes." And he says, "You're mistaken. If he was your best friend, he would not have left without leaving a forwarding address and a telephone number. He was therefore not your best friend. You're mistaken about the status of this person in your life. You're very bad at picking best friends. Secondly, if he were your best friend and did abandon you, you have to ask yourself, what makes you so abandonable?" Wonderful 180-degree turnaround. And that's what this whole thing is a 180-degree turnaround. And one of the, I think, underrated tools of the program is the gratitude list as a method of cultivating gratitude, but one must be slightly careful with it. The gratitude, if misused, can actually increase attachment to material outcomes, as though one's happiness is dependent on things going one's way, so one is grateful for things having gone one's way, which leaves one open to being unhappy when things don't go one's way. And that's a catastrophe. I think the best way to do gratitude lists, I was given this idea a while ago, and I think it's the best of the methods I've come across. In the morning, as part of my morning step 11, to write down 2 short lists. 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things I've appreciated in the last day, and 3 things I'm looking forward to in the day to come. And there's something about the word appreciation. I've had other people do this as well, and almost always they're little trivial things that have nothing to do with things going your way. Just things that you've suddenly enjoyed, things you've suddenly appreciated, which weren't part of the plan, but were just there and were lovely. And the things you're looking forward to over the next day. But there's no self in any of that. And it's very helpful in order to counteract the self-pity, because associated with the self-pity are the demands. And the thing I've had to recognise with demands and the unhappiness that flows from being full of demands is that although I'm unhappy when I'm unhappy, I'm the hero of my own nightmare. I'm the only person on the stage. The lamp lights are shining on me. That's it. No other people in the picture. Me, 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 me. And there's a self-importance about unhappiness. And I didn't start to get well until I was willing to be right-sized, until I was willing to be one of many. The line I hated in the 12 and 12, beyond anything, was the phrase worker amongst workers. I thought, if I'm just going to be like everyone else, you can keep it. Because I want to be important. And when I wanted to be happy more than I wanted to be important, then things started to change. I mentioned something about work, that I was going to mention something about work, and I will. Someone sent me a very complicated set of messages to do with a decision that needed to be made about work, and I looked at the screen after screen after screen on the WhatsApp of the complicated questions and the background and the sub-points, and I just wanted to go to bed for 2 weeks. I couldn't face it. And I thought my work philosophy is very simple. I turn up, I do what I'm asked to do, and I go home again at the end of the day. And when I go home, I stop thinking about it. I don't think about work when I'm not there. I don't even think about work when I am there. I'm doing the work. Why are you thinking about work? It doesn't need to be thought about, it needs to be done. That's why it's called work, not thought. The point about step 3 is that I don't care. In turning my will and life over, the my gets crossed out. And I have life, not my life. And I go to God and say, what do you want me to do today? And it might be do the dishes. It might be go and do the tasks that are my livelihood. I don't even use the word career anymore because I've given up my life in step 3. I've got something else. I don't have a career. I do things and they give me money for it. It's a little exchange situation we have going on. I have no room for personal ambition. That makes me want to go to bed for 2 weeks. LinkedIn makes me want to go to bed for 2 weeks. The primary purpose of the job is to do what is asked of me. And it's rather like with relationships. If I don't like the organisation and how it operates, and I disagree with everything, why am I there? I would rather work with people that treat me like a human being and earn a quarter of what I would otherwise earn than to work with arseholes who are stressed. I'm literally going to be dead at some point, so I don't want to look back having spent my life with arseholes who are stressed. It's too much. I can't. And if I don't want to do a particular type of job, I just say no, I'm not available, and I don't have to explain. It's a way of operating which doesn't look as though it should work, but it's worked in my occupation for around 20 years. I found something to do which people will pay for, and I do it, and then I go home. I have no sense of controlling or managing my what would be called a career in other senses. I haven't marketed anything. I've just done one thing at a time. What AA has taught me to do each thing well, regardless of whether anyone is watching, and you do it well because you've been asked to do it and you're doing it for God. Practicing the presence of God by Brother Lawrence is an excellent addition to the 12-step system, where he had to do rotten things. This 17th century monk who survived the 30 Years' War, crippled, and he would simply do everything for God. So that's what I do. I don't have lots of employers or clients. I work for God, and God says, go to the office, do the things. My other half definitely has a career. Someone asked him once, what's Tim's career? He said he types, and I do. So I just type. He's changing. He says spelling. He does spelling all day. So I spell words using the computer, and money comes in. And any further mental engagement with it is just toxic. I can't. Western civilization, I can't deal with the whole setup. But step 3 works, and I'm out of time. So the other questions we'll have to do in 10 years' time, whenever I'm back. So thank you for listening.